To begin this workshop, I'd like to welcome the Vice Provost of Research and the Dean of School of Information Systems, Professor Stephen Miller, who will be giving our opening address. Stephen Miller.
Social courtesy in the spirit of the sharing economy and just sort of sharing other things together. I'm putting my phone on Don't Ring for me. And all of you are overseas, so you might not get too many phone calls at the moment. In any event, that's the right thing. Welcome. First and foremost, a big thank you. For all of the teams who are here, well, one team had to travel all the way from the east side of Singapore to Tampines. But every other team had to travel a longer distance, be it some of the neighboring countries in ASEAN, be it countries in Northern Asia, and some from other continents, be they Europe or North America. So just the effort to mobilize to get here and to be here is a big deal. We know it because first the distance, the expense, the effort, the breadth. I just want to acknowledge that and say thank you. The organizing team, some of whom are in the room, and some of you folks are there, make sure the word gets back, in appreciation of everything that you have done to get here and be here to participate. We will make sure through our student organizing team that we give you the best possible experience. Now, that doesn't mean everything's going to be perfect. Remember, these are students like yourself. And they don't do this as a paid job. They all do it as a volunteer thing. And just as they're finishing finals and all that, this crushing workload of Apex is stuff that they have to co-manage, just like you guys. So, if something goes not quite perfect, with a smile, ask for help, they'll do their best. All right. And then I'd also like to thank people who are going to help us with our thematic workshop. Some of the coaches have been to Apex before, because I recognize a few. All right. And you know that we've evolved this way that we're not going to say a peep about the case today per se. You get the case tomorrow morning. Everybody's on equal footing. We hand you the case, and you get all the rules and instructions and related materials. But there's a reason that we choose a theme in the thematic workshop. And obviously, the thematic workshop and the case are related. Now, the people speaking today have not seen the case. Today have not seen the case. Right? That's an important thing. So, and I'm not jiving with you here. They're obviously here because they're related to the context of the topic we're speaking on, and they're sort of experts in some aspect of the domain, but they have no clue as to whether they're giving you a hint of the case or not. You know what I mean? So take it in the broader sense. Take it as a thematic workshop to just sort of give you context. Frankly, why do we do the thematic workshop? I frankly don't give a darn whether it helps you with the case or not. We do the thematic workshop because we always do cool themes that actually open your eyes to things that are important to you as you're all going to be year 4, year 3 students, and you're going to go out into the world and you're going to do stuff. And we want you to sort of say what's happening in the world that's interesting and important. That's why we do the thematic workshop. Now, given the pragmatics of it's the case competition, we obviously link it with the case. All right? So just sort of take it in for its own right and for its own intrinsic interest and how it might impact what you might do in an interview or an internship or a job or professional or career choices you have in your own life. And if in some ways we sort of get your little neural nets thinking a little differently, not just about the competition, about what you can do in life to make a difference, then Apex really makes a difference. And we sort of do it through this contrived exercise of a case competition, which, win or lose, it really doesn't matter. What matters is how you change and what you take away by going through. That's the thing that really matters. It's the interactions you have after Apex with the rest of the world, and you might look at things differently or know something. That's the real value and benefit. And we're serious about that. And that's sort of why we run it as this joint sort of educational, what's going on in the world setting together with the case studies. All right? Well, that's sort of my philosophy. And now we're going to get started. Our first speaker is Mr. Willie Cheng. And he's such a good fit and an appropriate fit for this workshop. Willie has authored some recent books, let's say over the last 10 years, on doing good well, about the social world, about the world that changes the world. Willie, we talk about Biz-IT integration. For many, many years, Willie was the country head of Accenture in Singapore. That seems so far back, a dim memory. But he advises business, he advises the social sector, and he's been a real student of somebody who's looked at the pragmatics of bringing the business sector and the social sector together. It's one thing to say it, and it sounds good, and who can argue. It's another thing to do it, and it's got some practicalities to it. And over the last decade or so, Willie's really delved into it. So he'll be our first speaker. And then our second speaker is going to be Prof. Cheng Shifen from our SMU School of Information Systems, who works on some of the technology enablement of the sharing economy and some of the selected aspects of technology enablement, especially in on-demand transportation, and how some of those same ideas can even be used beyond that direct application. So he's going to talk to you and just sort of give you ideas, because it's a Biz-IT case competition. We want to have multiple sides. And then Mr. Hin Kee is a member of Parliament of the government of Singapore. He's involved with the National Trade Union Congress, and he is a very thoughtful and artful and important spokesman for what we call as the National Taxi Association. Do I have that right? Okay. And Singapore has a lot of taxi drivers. I don't know the exact number, but the number might not be too far from 30, 40, 50,000. I mean, when you get the people who are sharing shifts and whatnot. And then a lot of people who've done it and retired. It's a it's a big group of people. And when you just walk in the streets in Singapore, you know how prevalent taxis are. He has very deep insight into what's going on in that industry and the human and social needs of these people, and just sort of what's going on in that environment. So he will be our final speaker. And then the fun part, we'll have the Q&A. With that, let's move on.
But things have changed a lot. Because if you look at it, 10 years ago, it used to be quite straightforward. Because the two are very separate. They differ from each other with their purpose, with their basis, their culture, but they kind of coexisted very symbiotically. Business was simply about profits. The social sector was not. In this business or the market economy, the focus was on doing well, at least doing well financially. And in the social sector or the social economy, the focus was on doing good. But of late, these two worlds are actually converging. They are being increasingly fused. The players from each sector are crisscrossing into each other and influencing what is happening on the other side. And that fusion is taking place at different levels. At the very basic level, there is a adoption and adaptation of ideas and practices between these two worlds. But at a much deeper level, right, there is a cross-pollination of values that is seeping and slowly altering the cultures and the DNA of the social and the market economies. And the result of what we have is that you've got a hybrid economy that's emerging, one in which the social and business sectors are increasingly being integrated. What I'd like to do now is to spend some time to just talk about these three aspects of the fusion of the business and the social sectors. First, the adoption of practices, ideas and models, right? Which, quite frankly, has primarily been from the corporate sector to the non-profit sector. And one example is just the whole notion of accountability through KPIs and whatnot. I think since the launch of the Modern Day Foundation, which is led by the likes of Andrew Carnegie and David Rockefeller, charities are now being called to the need for accountability, for transparency, and for measurable outcomes. This actually led fundraisers to promote a concept of what they call informed giving, where donors are being asked to be more discerning, more demanding, and more discriminating of who they give to. But probably a less intuitive practice that has moved away from the business sector to the non-profit sector is that of venture capital, which is increasingly applied to philanthropic giving. So in what is known as venture philanthropy, right, the giver, just like the venture capitalist, is personally engaged with his or her investee, and the focus is to build the capacity of the organization, as opposed to what traditionally most philanthropists do, to fund the mission of those organizations. Now you also have the reverse influence, primarily through the form of donations and volunteerism into the corporate sector. It has found its way into many of the CSR programs of these companies. Now, a more subtle aspect of this fusion is the cross-pollination of values. The commercial sector has been driven for years by economics, right? It's about self-interest, the survival of the fittest. On the other hand, the social sector is driven by the notion of doing good and values like generosity and compassion. But where the commercial sector charges for everything at market rates, the social sector is used to receiving goods and services for free, or at least at subsidized rates. So this cross-pollination of values actually has been primarily, to a large extent, from the social sector to the business sector. So rather than just kind of doing well at all costs, right, corporates are now seeing the value of doing well with some degree of goodness. And we see that in many of the evolution of the CSR programs of companies. The more elected companies see corporate social responsibility as more than just corporate giving. What they do is they embrace other aspects of social responsibilities and align that with the company operations and strategies. The latest proclamation of that integration is CSV, of creating shared value by Michael Porter, where he describes how companies can create economic value by creating societal value. And he defines shared values as policies and operating practices that enhances the competitiveness of a company while at the same time advancing the economic and social conditions of the communities in which they operate. But probably the most common view of where CSR is leading today in many companies is the sustainability agenda. Right? The sustainability agenda is about meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of the future generations to meet their own needs. In corporate terms, this has often been translated into environmental, social, and economic demands. And so these three pillars of what is commonly known as people, planet, and profits for sustainability, also called the triple bottom line, is basically the common standard by which many companies are trying to benchmark their sustainability programs today. Now, the sustainability agenda and many measures like this are defining actually a new form of capitalism, right, which goes by various names, such as moral capitalism, sufficiency economy, virtuous capitalism. The common characteristics of all this is that companies need to exist, not just for its shareholders, but for a diverse group of stakeholders, both inside and outside the corporations. And they need to have a value system that goes beyond looking at economic value, but also at values. And that pressure is coming not just from academics and scholars, but actually from all the other stakeholders. So you'll find that there's a new breed of consumers being defined called ROHAs, the lifestyles of health and sustainability. These are consumers who seek to live sustainability. They buy organic and fair trade products. They grow green, they use clean energy, and they believe in social justice. The more radical ones, right, they become activists and they demand for a more compassionate form of capitalism. One of the most visible is the Occupy movement that started off in Wall Street. And their slogan of the 99% against 1% is actually becoming synonymous with subversive disruption. But X now can be anything. And if you follow the argument that companies are accountable to shareholders and investors have the most clout, there's also a new breed of investors where they're increasingly caring about the values and the social impact the companies invest in. So you have the notion of socially responsible investing. The traditional approach has been to invest in those companies that don't do harm. The latest wave is called impact investing, where impact investors proactively seek to place capital in businesses that can generate not just financial returns, but also intentional social and or environmental returns. So the result of all this is that you have cross-adoption of models, cross-pollination of values, which is resulting in the integration of the social and the market economy in new ways. It's almost like it's a third economy emerging in which there are hybrids of the two. Hybrid organizations, hybrid financing approaches, and integrated social, collaborative solutions, many of them addressing the bottom of the pyramid. One of the most visible of this phenomenon is the emergence of social enterprises. They are now mushrooming with seed funding from foundations, government, and social investors. Social enterprises are essentially businesses with social missions. They sit at the center of social business hybrid spectrum, where on one side we've got charities who are focused on their mission with little or no regard for business, and on the other extreme we've got pure commercial companies who are focused entirely on maximizing profits. Money makes the world go round, in both the profit and non-profit sector. And traditionally, the financing needs of non-profit organizations have been donations, grants, sponsorships, and maybe to some degree, the sale of the products and services generated by their beneficiaries. But there are new creative vehicles that are now being created to fund non-profit organizations. And these new financial options, right, such as your program-related investments, social impact bonds, patient capital, they're actually a combination of grants, debt, equity instruments, which are adapted from Wall Street for the non-profit world, sometimes offered at below market rates to the non-profit organizations. And another financial innovation of interest is the emergence of the social stock exchange. We started in Brazil, essentially to raise capital and to fundraise. But the later ones are looking at providing a secondary social markets for social enterprises and impact investors. One focus of this social economy is what is known as the bottom of the pyramid. The group of people, some 2.7 million people who earn less than $2 a day. Traditionally, they've been ignored by companies, big businesses, because they're perceived to be not able to afford the basic necessities, very much dependent upon handouts from governments and charity organizations. Microfinance, which Muhammad Yunus and Grameen Bank were the two children of, has shown that if you adapt the right business model, you can make actually serving the poor a viable business proposition. So today, microfinance is a very vibrant industry that empowers many in the developing world. And now the term inclusive capitalism is being used to talk about selling goods and services to low-income people, while at the same time embracing poverty alleviation and strategies to improve their health, their nutrition, education, employment, and the environment. So for example, Mohammed Yunus has created a joint venture with Group Danone called Garment Danone Foods, which seeks to bring affordable nutrition to malnourished children in Bangladesh using fortified yogurt. The Garment Danone Alliance is actually illustrative of increasing collaboration between the three sectors, between government, businesses, and the social sector players, right, to address the needs of the poor of the world. And there are many examples of these integrated solutions that abound. And just to take one, the central one, Refugees United. That was an initiative in Uganda by Ericsson, the communications equipment maker, with the UN High Commission for Refugees and the Clinton Foundation, to build a service that is able to reunite refugees with their families. And the venture, which is called Refugees United, is an NGO established together with NTM, which is a mobile operator in Uganda. So to summarize, the world that had traditionally been separately and largely different, one doing good and the other doing well, are coming together through the cross-influence of practices and values between the two sectors. The social sector is now moving from one, which is about more than just doing good, to one where they are trying to do good well, with measures of accountability and greater discipline. And the business sector moving from one, which is kind of doing well at all costs, to doing well with some degree of goodness. And what is most significant is that the two are coming together and creating a hybrid economy where the players from both the social and the business sectors are collaborating to do good and well together. So this, I think, is only the beginning of a world in which things are going to change in more ways than one. Thank you.
Here is also because during the past few years I've been spending a lot of time studying really how taxi can be made more efficient. So when I began working on this subject, I actually began to recognize that people's concept about taxi actually varies quite a bit from country to country. Myself, I'm from Taiwan, also a country where you have a very high population of taxis. So we are so used to the fact that you can just flag down a taxi everywhere on the street. But later, when I talked to other researchers from other countries, I began to realize that really taxi services is not as affordable, as ubiquitous as it is in Asia. Actually, if you go to Europe, you go to most of the US cities, taxis are considered as a luxury. Right? So this is actually really the beginning part of the reason why I began this whole journey, try to look at from the data's perspective, look for opportunity, look for places where we can actually make changes to this whole industry. So of course nowadays everybody talk about Uber, talk about how Uber is going to change the design of the whole city, how city is going to operate. But I think probably really, if we think about how cities should operate, we should go back to this fundamental issue, really how you should provide point-to-point transport service to your citizen. Right? And this is really the reason why you see Uber is flourishing in different countries. Because really government is not doing enough, government's effort is not really sufficient, right, in most of the places where Uber is doing very well. Right? So, so this is basically how we are going to get started. So I'm not going to have a lot of very like text, highly text-centric presentation. What I'm going to show you is just a few diagrams based on past few years of our research, just to show you some of the potentials, some of the opportunities that we can do. Right? It's not just We're not thinking about really replacing your public service, your transport service with Uber, right? Unless you want to do that. Otherwise, really, you should be thinking about, you have a city, you hire so many people doing public transport. How do you make them more affordable, more convenient, and more serviceable, right? I mean, this is basically the direction we are going. All right, so if you look at it, we still want to satisfy people's point-to-point transportation. Now, not a lot of choices. Either you replace private car ownership with like alternative. Usually, if you look at it, you can do it by using taxi, you can use limousine services, or nowadays you can use Uber or some other competitors, right? This is really to basically make sure that people don't just drive a private car in the morning to the city center, and in the afternoon you drive back. Because if you think about that, really this is a great waste of the space. For those of you who are coming from the nearby countries, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, you will know what I mean, right? So during rush hour, you try to go onto the street, even just crossing the major highway, 5-minute drive when there's no traffic. During rush hour, it can take as long as 2 hours. Right? This is like really talked to me by one of the executives over there. Right? So this is the phenomenon, right? You want to deal with. You want to make sure that people don't drive using their private car. So this is the reason why, I mean, a lot of those cities where you are going to see a lot of taxi, limousines, or Uber-like of the service. The second mode, right, which is still taken by majority of the city then, is a fixed mode, a mixed mode of the transportations. You can probably imagine you can take a walk to the nearby train station or the subway station, take a long distance rail ride across the city, and then when you reach the destination, either you take a short walk, or in some city where the shared bike service is available, maybe you're going to rent a bike, or you just simply hire a taxi and just go to your final destination. This is very common. So again, the drawback of this, or the challenge that we see in this, is that you want to make sure that the transition period and the transition effort is as slow as possible, which is not very easy to achieve, as we will see shortly. So we begin with the first opportunity that we can see over here, which is the art of taxi driving. Imagine you are a taxi driver, you are driving around Singapore. And this is the map of Singapore, divided into 99 different zones. This is the planning zone, chosen not for a particular reason, just to imagine if you want to turn this into a strategic decision-making problem. Then you, as a taxi driver, this is the decision you have to make on a daily basis, actually minute-by-minute basis. You are currently over here. This is, roughly speaking, right, this hour of the day. You are vacant, you are free. Now you have to pick the next destination you should roam, right? Not a very easy choice. So you just continue to drive around in the city area. What if after 10 minutes of the time you couldn't find any passenger? Do you continue to drive home? Or do you drive to a nearby area? If so, which particular area are you going to drive to? Which particular route you are going to take? Right? And just look at that, Singapore is actually not a very large city, right? But still you have a lot of choices. And this is not a single individual's choices, because if you think about that, at the same time on the street, there are 28,000 drivers just like you, trying to search for passengers. All of them try to maximize their revenues. All of them making very similar choices. So your so-called best decision depends not just on your own personal judgment, but also on other people's decision. This is the reason why it is so difficult to be an excellent taxi driver. So now this is the first information that we get based on the analysis of all the taxi drivers in Singapore, right? So the way you read it is as follows. So here you see two diagrams. They basically represent two rush hours, morning rush hours and evening rush hours. On the x-axis, this is essentially taxi drivers' choices. For each individual zones that we see in the previous chart on the screen, we actually calculate how many empty taxi drivers are driving into that particular zones. Right? We use, to normalize all the numbers, we use percentage to represent that number. That basically represents the decisions that are made by individual taxis. So now we try to quantify whether or not people are making sensible decisions. So we attach y-axis to it. Y-axis represent numbers of passenger trips that originate from each and every region. Effectively, that reflects how attractive that region is in terms of generating traffic, right? So after we collect this particular 2 pieces of information for all the zones during this 2 rush hour period, we plotted on this particular chart and we try to run a linear regression. And as you can see over here, we have 2 lines over here, highly positively correlated, which basically means that when people are making their decision, they make their decision pretty much correlates on how attractive that region is, right? So this is what I mean. People are making very reasonable choice, right? If you imagine you are a taxi driver, you don't have any idea about where to go to, nobody tells you, right? First thing comes to mind are those areas where are most likely to generate traffic. And we see that people do that very well. So this is a reasonable start, but this is not the best possible solution that you can generate. And this is the proof of that, right? So again, this is the second information we can get also from the data. So again, over here, we present 2 different pieces of information. First is the vacancy ratio. This basically means that if taxi drivers, they intend to cruise on the street, how likely are they going to be occupied, right? This is the blue line over here indicates the percentage of the time they are cruising empty. Not surprisingly, if you cruise during the midnight, you're not going to get a lot of traffic. But surprising fact is that even during rush hours, you see those empty cruising taxis, they reach, roughly speaking, 20%. Right? And for the rest of the day, you see that that particular ratio stay around 30%, 30 to 35%. Right? And then another second piece of information that we see is that the booking ratio, right? That basically represents that how many taxi passengers are willing to pay additional booking fees, right? I mean, in Singapore, if you want to book the taxi, you need to pay some additional money for that. Roughly speaking, about $3, right? So that is a pretty good proxy regarding how urgent people or how desperate people are in getting a taxi. Again, not surprisingly, you see that during the morning rush hour, you see this particular ratio surge to around 30%. This reflects that really during the morning rush hour, this is the time that people find it most difficult to find taxi. That's why they are willing to pay this additional premium for taxi. But again, this is really one of the very interesting facts. We see that although there are so many people so desperately want to find taxi, you still see the vacancy ratio to hover around 20%, above 20% actually. So this is the problem that we see and we want to solve. And again, we like to argue that this is not surprising. By looking at the data, we see that this is a difficult problem. And by individual taxi driver alone, we find it very challenging to actually resolve this issue, unless some additional pieces of information can be provided. All right, the final diagram over here to close this particular session is that this is the income distribution for a typical taxi driver in Singapore, right? So if we look at 3 different segments, right? First is the lower income, the middle income, and the really very high income group. We try to calculate how strategic they are. We come up with a particular measure, right, to basically quantify your strategic behavior, your strategic thinking, right? This is basically the depth about how many levels of anticipation you can carry out in your mind against all the other drivers in the market, right? The higher the number, the more numbers of depths, numbers of levels you can think in anticipation of your competitor. So we see that there's a strong correlation. The higher the number, the more likely that you're going to earn a high income. Again, we are not saying that this is a direct contribution. This is not the only contributor, right? But you see very strong correlation in that. In other words, right, so this is a big thing that we are really thinking about now, right? If we are able to provide, let's say, a computer-generated information, taking into account both the historical information, the real-time supply and demand imbalances throughout the city, we should be able to generate decisions that comes with infinite levels of rationality. This is actually, if you ever taken any Econ 101 courses, this is the common assumption, right? We assume that people are fully rational. This is what we mean by fully rational, 100% of rationality. But of course, in practice, we see, you just see this particular number over here. In practice, people cannot even cross the number of 2. And this is not just in taxi driving, right? If you think about that, the same kind of experiment, the same kind of exercises have been conducted many, many times, very reliably in all kinds of domains. No matter what your education level is, no matter which particular industry you are in, you can be in finance, you can be an MBA student, you can be a CEO, doesn't matter. This is human limitation. Without external help, your reasoning level will be at around 2. Right? Again, what it means is, the way to recognize this particular significant level 0 basically means that you don't have any intelligence. When you make decisions, just flip a coin. Right? This is level 0. Level 1 means that you assume that your opponent is a coin flipper. You try to generate strategy against it. Level 2 is assume that your opponent is level 0 and level 1. And on average, people have difficulty reaching even level 2. This is the reason why we believe there's still great potential where we can actually help people. Another good example, I don't really put up the graph over here, is that actually this is one of the reasons why I begin doing this research on taxis. Right? The most striking example that I seen just through my own eyes is when I exit Changi Airport, when I first visited Singapore about 12 years ago, 10, 12 years ago. I see these super long taxi queues lining outside Changi Airport, Terminal 1. Kilometers of taxi waiting there. So I am asking myself this question, are they really making sensible decisions? 2-3 kilometers of taxi waiting there, right? So in 2009, when I finally had the chance to get my hand on one of the taxi fleets data set, this is actually the first question I try to answer. Are people making rational choice? So answer obviously is no. Majority of time when people queue there, they are losing money in exploitation. Right? They can actually earn more money if they go elsewhere. Of course, there are other reasons why people choose to queue in the very long taxi queue. People just want to relax, doesn't want to think. Just go there for coffee break maybe, for a toilet break maybe. Right? But again, whole population as a whole making money losing decision. This is really mind-boggling. But this is not the end of the story. Right? If it ends here, this is really pessimistic. Right? It's kind of sad. But one thing we do observe is that in the December of 2009, there's a slight change to the layout of the airport. A signboard, electronic signboard was erected. That signboard only contained 8 numbers. First row of the numbers of taxis waiting at 4 different terminals. The second row of numbers of flights that are expected to arrive in the next about 30 minutes. Right? With these 8 numbers presented to drivers coming to the airport, you see significant increase in the efficiency. People, taxi drivers, they are waiting for 20% less time after this particular signboard was erected, and they are getting more passenger rides. Right? So you see that by providing information, people automatically make better decisions. But the major thing over here, the most critical thing over here is that how do you provide relevant information? Because studies show that if you provide irrelevant information, you actually make people's decision quality worse. Right? So I think this is a very good example why we are very optimistic about really how we can design a system that can help the driver. Okay, so to close out the second part, I think this is really about social justice and how we can use mobility on demand to help those underserved region of your city, right? So again, by looking at the data, we see that this is a surprising fact that 20% of all the taxi trips, they are less than 2 kilometers. Right? So again, when you think about that, 2 kilometers probably take you 30 minutes, 20 minutes of walking. Right? But people are taking taxis. And if you relax this 2 kilometers to 3 kilometers, that's 30% of the whole trip, of all the taxi trips. And the numbers you are seeing over here are the region, the areas where we see the greatest concentration of the origin of such kind of the trip. Not surprisingly, I mean the center area that I highlighted over here, they are the CBD, Central Business District. You have a lot of high rises over there, a lot of tourists, a lot of business travelers, so not surprisingly, they have a lot of short distance travel. But outside of the city center, you see all these little dots across the city. If you are from Singapore or you are familiar with the Singapore layout, you will know that all those dots are the stations of our rail, we call it as in the MRT station, that's our rail system, right? So that basically highlights the need for people to use taxi to finish the last mile of the travel, even though that is extremely short. And remind you, this is a daily pattern. This is a very typical weekday. It means that a significant amount of people are making this kind of travel. I highlight one region for you to be really what it is like to actually satisfy your last mile demand by using only taxi, right? So the region I choose is on the upper region. This is a region we call it Eastern, right? It's a very remote area, right? And if you look at it, this is all the part of the destination in this particular area. And this is a very special area because it's a mixture of industrial development. You have a military camp, and you have government schools, around major government school within this region, and there's a major hospital over here as well. Over here, if you see the lower corner, you see a lot of concentration of dots over there. That is the hospital, right? So again, if you look at it, I mean, you can do more analysis to it, but the conclusion is very clear, right? People depend on taxi in this region to finish their first mile travel, their last mile travel. And as a government agency, if you look at this big data, you see great potential for improvement of the connection services. If you are able to improve the connection services over here, not just are you going to improve the quality of life over here by reducing the effort that you need to accomplish what I mentioned earlier, mixed mode transportation, right? You also will be able, imagine, you potentially can be a driving force to convince people to give up private car, right? What numbers, the kind of numbers we cannot capture over here is the amount of people who actually, because of inconvenience, they choose to drive. If you are able to make it more convenient, potentially, if people are not using taxi, means that actually the connection to public transport is very convenient. People might also give up private car driving. All right, the final chart over here is to just demonstrate the enabling technology that's behind all this. Right? One of the reasons, of course, we have all this information, we have the platform for us to fulfill the service is because of the smartphone penetration, right? So I mean, the fact that all of you, I guess, all of you have this smartphone demonstrate a point that I don't really need to show. But one of the phenomena on this particular chart, really I would like to point out are two countries, Japan and France, right? These are two countries where until just last year, you still see very low adoption of smartphones. For Japan, I think probably the reason is because their traditional phone service is so powerful. They don't see an immediate need to convert to smartphone. And for France, I'm not quite sure. Maybe they're just against the idea of holding an American-made device. So you don't see a lot of smartphone adoption. But again, you see that the latest information company is crossing the mark of 50%, right? Which is very significant. You imagine how much information are being collected. You know, now you like it or not, I mean, they are being collected. Right? You understand people's mobility pattern much, much better. You don't have to rely on very expensive government survey to understand where people live, where people work, how people make their daily commute. By looking at those information, just like the one that we did previously, you can actually identify all those potential places where you can make an improvement. And this is really the place where I think this is probably part of the scene for this particular competition, right? You really think about, with all this technology around, still a lot of problems where you particularly in all this mega city in the emerging countries, you see a lot of problems need to be addressed, a lot of problems need to be solved, right? How do you use this kind of new technologies to think about new services, right? Not just Uber-like services, which we already see enough of them, right? You want to see new ways of improving citizens' life quality, to improve the situation of inequality, right? Different regions in the city, how do you try to serve them as better as you can? Right? So I think I will stop here.
Time is now 2:20. It's in the afternoon, and I think you have heard fairly deep insights of hybrid economy and how businesses should behave, and also look at transport statistics. I will focus my sharing basically on what is in the mind of a taxi driver as he figures out how to make ends meet in the Singapore context. Maybe instead of giving you facts, a few key questions. First question is, why are taxi drivers so upset with the arrival of third-party apps, whether you call it Uber, you call it Grab, and the likes of it? Why are they so upset? You look at many countries around the world, you see strikes. I was in London some time back, and they were all parking in front of Downing Street and basically block up the whole traffic. And reports are all over the world about how they protest, how they are objecting, why are they so frustrated about this advent of new technology that almost every consumer loves it. I mean, why would you be so upset when consumers are happy? Is it because you're protecting of your own industry? Are you worried about the fact that you cannot move over to the other business? Many of the times when I speak to taxi drivers, I ask them, there is actually easier mobility from you as a taxi driver to move to become a third-party private hire vehicle driver. The obstacle of entry into that industry is actually lower because you already have the gold standard of a vocation license as a taxi driver. You've been through background screening, you've been through medical checkup, you've been through all the necessary training. For you to move to that business, it's actually a pinch. And the fact is, the rental is cheaper on the other side. So, if you can find customers easier through apps booking and instead of empty cruising around 20% of the time, that option sounds like a better option. Why don't move over? Why are you so fixated with your current mode of making a living? Not that you're very loyal to a particular brand and thinking yourself as a taxi driver as the only option in life, why not move over? I'll provide some of the background and the replies, and then you can make up your mind as to are they making rational decision or are they just making decision based on how they feel. So that's one question. Why not just move over? Why are you so upset? Second question is, recently some of these third-party apps in the local context have decided to lower their fares. Basically, when you flag down taxi, there's a flag down fare. In Singapore, it's about 320 to 380, 390, depending on the newness of the cab and the size of the taxi. For the third-party apps, the private hire vehicle through Uber and through Grab, etc., they've decided to lower the fare just 2 weeks ago by 15% to about $3. And then there was a lot of noise and people were upset. The drivers themselves were very upset. Why are they upset? Actually, two groups of drivers were upset. The private hire drivers are upset and the taxi drivers are upset. Now, it sounds a bit strange when you have two competing businesses and one business lower their fare and both groups of drivers are upset. It doesn't sound logical. And what's the rationality behind it? I will attempt to give you a reply on that later. So these are the two questions. Why are they so upset with the advent of new technology that benefit consumers? And why are they upset when fares are lowered for one of the businesses and both groups of drivers are upset? The third question is, in a typical economy, when you are able to be a price setter or a fare taker, you have one control over the other. But for private hire drivers and taxi drivers, they have no control over price. That means the company or the apps booking company will set the price. whether it's a flag down fare or the meter running rates. The company will set the fares. You're also a price taker. That means you lease the car from the leasing company or you lease the car from a taxi operator. In both circumstances, you cannot set the rental. So for taxi drivers and private hire drivers, you basically are a fare taker and a price taker. You have no control over either one of these variables. And when you have no control over either one of these variables, what it means is basically you are very dependent on how they set the fares and the rental to enable you to make the business decisions that you make. Now that last part has a big significant impact on why are they so upset over the first reason of the advent of this new technology and why are they so upset over the fare structure. Going back to some fundamental, Singapore, as earlier mentioned, we have 28,000 taxis flying the streets every day. Estimate is that we have 8 to 10,000 private hire cars flying the streets every day. So you're looking at about 38,000 vehicles offering point-to-point services in the Singapore context. 28,000 taxis, 10,000 private hire. How many taxi trips are made a day from these 28,000? I think this is significant information, which is, on average, we're looking at about 1,010,000 trips made a day through taxis. 1,010,000 trips. These are engaged trips, that means there are people on board, and therefore each taxi, 28,000, you're making about 35 trips per 24-hour cycle. Every taxi make about 35 trips per 24-hour cycle. How many taxi drivers do we have? We have, of course, 28,000 minimum because there are 28,000 vehicles running. There are about 40% relief driver pool, which makes about 10 to 12,000. So 10 to 12,000 vehicles are on 2 shift, and the other 16,000 on 1 shift drivers. So far, you catch the numbers? Now, what it means is this. What it means is that our taxi vehicles are not fully utilized on a 2-shift basis. No one person can drive 24 hours for sure. So what we have is 60% of our taxis are only used on 1-shift basis. So apart from the fact that the gap exists with regards to cruising around looking for consumers, you also have another problem of taxi not maximizing its utilization on a 24-hour cycle. What's the reason behind the mismatch between relief driver and the available vehicle that is able to continue to run 24 hours? There are a few reasons behind it. First, we have 100,000 taxi vocation license holders in Singapore. 100,000. Basically what it means is, for 28,000 taxis, you typically would have at least 3.4 to 3.5 drivers per taxi. But we don't have that. We have 1.4. 40% relief. So what happened to the other 60,000 drivers who with vocational license? What they basically do in our local context is a recession-proof system. To get a taxi vocation license for many of them is, in the event, in case I've been retrenched or I'm out of job, I will have a vocation license that enables me to join the taxi trade. So it's a rainy day umbrella program. They obtain the license to keep it in case one of these days we need it. So what happened to the other 28,000? They are full-time drivers. Of the 40%, many of them are part-time drivers, many of them are full-time part-time drivers. Part-time drivers could be people with a day job, and maybe the day job, they take another 3 hours driving in the night to supplement the income. Another large proportion of the 40% are full-time drivers. So as you can see, many of them make it their vocation, their full-time job. So whenever there's competition coming in, they get upset because it impacts on their livelihood. And hence, in Singapore and elsewhere, you see people getting very concerned when third-party apps like Uber and Grab come into the scene and offer cheaper available rides. because for many of them, this would mean that there's a direct impact on their income. Now, what I understand from many regional partners and friends in other countries, I've met with them, I've spoken with them, typically to get a taxi license in every country, there's a lot of obstacle and hindrance to clear. In Singapore, not only as a driver, you've got to clear those obstacles, the vehicle themselves also have to be sort of pass certain criteria yardstick. What are the criteria? Every vehicle in Singapore as a taxi can only be used for 8 years. Not more than that, and only 8 years. It has to be serviced on a regular basis, and the service record must be submitted to the Land Transport Authority, the government agency that looked at it, and make sure that the vehicle is of running standards. Every taxi has to meet Euro 4 or Euro 5 standards. Anything less than that, you cannot ply the streets. So, a high cost of entry for getting vehicle in, you have to service on a regular basis, and you only can run it for 8 years. So, what the operator does is that they compute the cost of the rental of this vehicle, add in their profit margin, and therefore on a typical basis in Singapore, the daily rental for a taxi is about $133, say. Works out to be $110 US a day. Diesel, benefiting from the recent oil price, is about 20 Sing dollars a day. So you have about $160 in terms of overheads for every one of this taxi driver. Based on 35 trips a day I mentioned earlier, their typical income is about $35 to $40 take home after deducting off the expenditure of the rental and the diesel costs. So this is very typical because over the last few years, the per trip every day is about 1 million. The taxi number is over about 28,000. The taxi drivers relief pool is about the same. So we could sort of see some consistency in terms of the earning. The net growth in real income over the last 5 years for taxi is about 1%. So that's not a huge growth as far as income is concerned. Based on this kind of background, you can understand why they are upset whenever somebody come in and offer a lower fare and better options. Because there's a lot of overheads, there are also entry barriers as far as the taxi and the vehicle that they are driving is concerned. Second question, why were they upset when fares were lower for Uber and Grab car rides? Both set of drivers were upset. I spoke to both set of drivers. The taxi drivers are upset because it took away potential customer from their side of the story, and they cannot control the fares. The fares are set by the taxi companies. They only have to go on the basis of what the fares are set. They have no destiny over how they charge the fares. So what some of them did is, the meter may reach $6.80, they will give the consumer an 80 cents discount and say, okay, I'll just take $6 off you. So they are taking that direct discount off their own earnings. So that's why they're upset. The Uber and Grab car drivers, the third-party hire drivers, were also upset. They're upset because the lower fares came from their earnings. It didn't come from the company who said that I'm here to give a discount or a voucher for every commuters who take my service. It was deducted from the earnings of the driver themselves. So they were upset because, like I mentioned earlier, they are price taker and they are fare takers. They couldn't quite control how these fares are being structured, how the raising and the lowering of fares were determined by the companies and not by themselves. So, as you can see, once you lower a fare, consumer will be very pleased, but the two groups of drivers were very upset because the profit remains the same for the taxi operator and the private hire company and the apps company, but the drivers themselves, being fair and price takers, have no say over how these numbers impact on them. Now, the third and final question I mentioned earlier is about the fact that, taxi driver, you could easily move over to become an Uber driver if you think that the other party has a better offering. You don't have to be so fixated about a brand or a particular location. You can migrate over to that lower cost environment, that more popular environment. And if most consumer likes that, why don't you just move over to the other side? The business structure by many taxi operators both here in Singapore and elsewhere, it's quite the same. What they do is this. They say that while we operate in a free market environment, they will tell the taxi drivers, if you serve my company or you rent for me for 3 years or more, I will work in an incentive program for you. There will be incentive for long staying. If you are accident free for 3 years, I'll give you a bonus at the end of the day. If you stay with me for 5 years, I'll give you a particular incentives. These are soft ways in which taxi operators sort of lock in the drivers into their own fleet. They want to prevent them from jumping from one brand to another. So they lock in certain system that's time-based. So the longer you stay with me, I will promise you a return at the end of certain period of time. So as a result of this kind of business structure, for many drivers, they could not just sort of pack their bag and go over to the other business just on the whim and fancy. They have to calculate, if I move over, I'll lose that incentive that I'm due to get in half year's time, in a year's time. I will be receiving sort of discounts and bonuses that I'll be getting in a year's time, in 2 years' time. It is not as free a market as many would like to make it out to be because of business practices. Now, whether these practices are ethical, they are fair, they are reasonable, is a separate issue. The matter is that from the perspective of the driver themselves, apart from making decisions about where to go, where to park, and where to meet the commuters, they have to decide which option do I take that minimizes my costs and maximizes my return. Now, on a side note, 3 years ago, we spoke to Changi Airport. After witnessing that long queue at all the terminals and having that display panel that says, Terminal 1, how many taxis queuing up, how many flights coming in, we asked Changi Airport, could you not use technology to change how drivers behave? And we suggested to them from the union, would you like to design an app? And these apps provide taxi driver the same information. Terminal 1, how many taxis queuing up, how many flights coming in. But the difference about the apps and the display board along Changi Airport is this. When you are driving, say, about 5 kilometers away or 7 kilometers away from Changi Airport, the apps will tell you how many taxis queue are there. You can make a decision to turn left towards Changi Airport or to turn right to another venue. For that location-based display board, when you're already at Changi, you just have to decide whether I go Terminal 1, 2, or 3. Whereas for apps, you can decide, if a different road, I'll take a different route and leave that direction. I'm not locked into Changi Airport anymore. I can decide to leave that area and go to customer elsewhere. So apps can actually shape the life of how businesses are run, how taxi drivers make their decisions. And I think before even the advent of third-party apps, the prevalent use of these apps actually could better match demand and supply in decision making and maximizing of income for taxi drivers. So those are the 3 key questions, and I'll leave you with one last part is this. For the longest time, in Singapore at least, we have said that station to station will be the mass rapid transit. From one MRT station to another station. We try to have as many lines, as many stations to minimize public commuting inconveniences. Then we added in stops to stop at the same time, which is from bus stop to bus stops. And if the bus stops are more prevalent and spread out better, there's also less inconvenience. Then there's point to point, which is what taxi provide. Over the last few months, we have debated and we are now going to allow the use of personal mobility devices to link up the last mile. So that point to point, stop to stop, you have easy access to go to the MRT station using your personal mobility device, whether it's an e-scooter, whether it's a hoverboard, whether it's electric bicycle or bicycles. You can cycle from your home to the train station, park it there, or carry on your device, bring it to the train station and move to the next destination of choice. So increasingly, the pressure from taxi driving not just comes from Uber and Grab, kind of third-party apps, more train station, more bus stops, but also the more prevalent use of personal mobility device. How it will shape their decision making will therefore depend on how consumers take to these kind of devices and this kind of option And then we hope that the use of information derived from a lot of rights and decision-making and behavior of consumer will be inputted into the taxi driver's terminal to enable them to know, instead of based on gut feel and experience, to know where are the gaps and where are the most needs on different times of the day, so that they can just migrate to that location instead of driving around aimlessly or hopefully looking for a fare that's standing on the road.
While we're getting settled, I have to say, like, wow, that's a lot to take in. Everybody, Lily starting on the business and the social in a very coherent framework and some very clearly well thought out ideas on how these come together. She fends empirical work based on several years of work they've done on matching supply and demand and just looking at some of the characteristics of what's going on with taxis here in Singapore. Just, again, some very well thought out ways of how to visualize that to get the points out. And then our final talk, where, as we said, what's in the mind of a driver? And how do you see this from the perspective of people who are earning their living doing the taxis and what some of the trade-offs are doing? So this bit about being a company in the sharing economy, in the transport industry in Southeast Asia, and looking at sort of business issues, regulatory issues, doing social good, and technology enablement. This is sort of the themes we're bringing together. And I have to say to the speakers, you guys were all great. Thank you. It was really, really neat. And I've known some of you just new things that I haven't quite seen before. I want to thank all of you. All right. Now, a moment ago, I had on my screen questions. And now I see nothing on my screen. So where did those questions go? So I'm going to just do these some in the order, not in the order in which they've come in, but people who have similar kinds of questions. Lily, as the business sector and the social sector have this cross-influence on each other, as you pointed out, what are obstacles that are commonly faced? What obstacles come up, right? And what are people doing about these obstacles?
Well, I think the main obstacle to the business and social sector coming together is the fact that both have been operating on different paradigms, right? So the challenge really is the cross paradigm, because human beings are naturally resistant to change. So we like to continue doing what we are doing. And I think that coming together really is also somewhat a reaction to some of the ills that we are seeing today as a result of the way things have been going. A lot of people are dissatisfied how businesses are going because of the perceived excessive compensation and the increasing divide between the haves and have-nots as a result of what's happening in the corporate world. Of course, once you have this scandal, it just kind of create a lot more visibility there. But people are also unhappy with what's happening in the non-profit world because of the perceived lack of accountability, and how just simply because they're doing good work, they can do it without the concern of the kind of resources they are applying and how they go about doing it. So I think that the cross-influence of each other is really improving both sectors, and the greatest hurdles really is the level of change.
Right. we have different kinds of questions here, sort of coming from very different perspectives, so I'm doing a little curating in my head as we go here. Just a quick thing, because some of these things, you might, it's curious why people ask, but hey, it's how sort of people get some of these things clear. Some students really ask, what's the difference between conscious capitalism and sustainability? And all these buzzwords get bandied around and, you know, have some overlap. But what's a tighter way to get people to say, conscious capitalism would mean this, but sustainability would mean that?
I think they're just kind of different buzzwords, kind of around different things. Sustainability is the kind of the more common way in which the social sector is trying to influence how the rest of the world should behave. Right? It is trying to create a world today as best as you can without compromising the ability of our children, future generations, to live the world the way that they would like to, by consuming the resources at the rate at which it can be replaced. So sustainability has very much this concept about doing what we want to, but within the limits of not compromising the ability of the future generation to do what they are able to. The whole notion of conscious capitalism, moral capitalism, is a bit of the sustainability thing about not compromising the future generation, but actually it goes beyond that to be a very responsible corporate citizen in terms of how you operate, not just for the future, but even for today, in terms of the impact that you have, not just on one group of stakeholders, primarily shareholders, but also on the other stakeholders, the people within the company, the employees, the suppliers, and also the broader community.
All right, let's, you know, this is interesting because it sounds great. All these real-time things and the questions come in. It's actually hard to work with because it's moving all the time. The numbers are going. It's not, you know, just the user interface, the reality of doing something versus the advertising glitz are not always the same. Okay. So let me do the following. There was a question about what has the Singapore government done in recent years to make point-to-point transportation better? It's a broad question, and some of these people aren't expert in the local scene. How would you respond to that?
Well, one of the things that is done, which most people don't see as a form of transport, is to provide covered linkway for 400 meters around the MRT station. Now you think about it, why is providing covered linkway a transport solution? I mean, it is a transport solution because for people who wanted to move to and to walk instead of waiting for a feeder service bus to bring you to the train station, if you can walk on the sheltered linkway, it makes it easier for the individual to be able to move to the train station. That's one of the solutions that we put up, although it is not purely a transport solution. The other transport solution that came on the scene over the last 3 years is this option of free train rides before 7:30 a.m. So if a person is prepared to come on the train and arrive at, enter the train and exit before 7:45, he's able to take free train rides every day if he so choose to come earlier to work. So basically, no transportation costs if you're prepared to come early to work. Then, of course, then the problems start to emerge, whether companies and corporations have that kind of supporting infrastructure that enable you to come early. But technically what happened is over the last 3 years we have monitored, about 30% more people have moved away from peak hour transport to becoming so-called taking advantage of these free rides. So 1/3 of the commuters have decided to alleviate the demand during peak period to go to pre-peak period free rides. So that's another solution. And over the last 2 months, we have also announced that we now legalize personal mobility devices. There will be hoverboards, e-scooter, electric bikes, bicycles through a certain framework that enable people to connect to their last mile. So this is giving personal choices to individuals as regards to how do they move about from point to point. And the last point I want to mention is this. 4 years ago, the Land Transport Authority in Singapore decided that to increase availability of taxi, they have started a taxi availability standards, which no country in the world has run, and the standards are as such. 85% of taxi must travel 250 kilometers a day. 85% of your taxi fleet must travel 250 kilometers a day. Now, whether there is empty cruising or there's a passenger on board doesn't make a difference. You have to travel 250 kilometers a day, and 85% of the fleet must be available during morning peak and evening peak. So taxi drivers have to come out during peak hours and have to drive that. Now, whether does that really match demand and supply is a separate matter, but those are proxy indicators done by the authorities to assure commuters that the fleet is active on the road at this hour and they are traveling at least 250 kilometers a day. Nobody in Singapore drives 250 kilometers in this island of ours, but the only group that does that are the taxi drivers.
Steve, can I just try and maybe be provocative here with Pinky? Because speaking as a consumer, I would say that all those things which Pinky talk about, what the government trying to do, number of hours on the road and all that, actually I think it really work. What worked, I think, in the last year or so was just the advent of Uber and Grab. I mean, as a commuter, right, I try not to drive. I try to take public transport. Public transport is good up to a certain point. If you want to get from point A to point B, and there's no train station or bus, nearby. Sometimes you're just in a hurry, you just need to get from point A to point B. In the past, there was no assurance that when you wanted a cab, you would ever get a cab. In fact, the worst time to ever get a cab is when it's peak hours. Right? They are just not available. Today, I don't have that problem. It's just a question of price. You go to either Grab or you go Uber, you will get a vehicle. That just costs a lot, right? You will get a vehicle. So I would say that the rise of Uber and Grab, while it's not been good for the taxi drivers, actually they have tremendously improved commuting. So from a consumer standpoint, there's no question that they actually are a social good.
No doubt that the incumbent taxi operators have been sitting on something for a long time. And that something has not prompted them to either innovate or come up with solutions that Grab or Uber could do. I mean, think about it. Matching demand and supply is not really a rocket science. Okay. The data analytics behind it might be, but matching of demand and supply through a smartphone is not rocket science. You don't require a lot of brand new breakthrough ideas. Why did they not do it before the advent of the two new competitors? Could be because of profit or just incumbent operators happy to be where they are. Now, many years ago there was this debate, is taxi a public service vehicle or a private hire vehicle? And because it's deemed by the authorities to be public service vehicle, you are not allowed to have variable fares. Why? Because if he has got more purchasing power, he's prepared to pay 2 times the fare. I don't have it. I only prepared to pay the current fare. I don't get access to the vehicle. Now that's not public service vehicle. So there is a conscious effort by the authority to make sure that you don't vary your fare based on demand. The person that is most able to pay is not allowed to have advantage over the person who is not able to pay. Now that's a conscious decision by the land transport side to ensure that it remains a public service vehicle. Then along the way came Uber and Grab says that if you're prepared to pay times 2.5 times 3, I'm prepared to offer you that service. And consumers say, yes, I'm prepared to do so. And suddenly it threw this whole concept wide open and say that, look, are we going to end up a day whereby only those who can afford will have transport, and those who don't have point-to-point? That became another big debate, because all along the position and the principle was public service vehicle cannot be based on the ability of the highest bidder. It must be based on standard fare across the board. With this new technology, I think, and the consumer behavior, like Willie here, prepared to pay extra just for that assurance, suddenly it's now changing the entire game. And I hope for the better, because there must be a proportion of person that is allowed to take standard fare, and there's another proportion allowed to take based on highest bidder.
What we're going to do is, I'm going to sort of make what I'm surprised. Hold up. Stop sending in questions here. Because I see these here, and I'll work with them. But I know from prior experience, it's actually more fun to ask people to speak. All right? So people who have questions, who's got questions? Who wants to ask something? I've got some questions that I'm going to exercise my facilitator at. But for this, and announce just your name and where you're from.
So my name is Zen. I'm from Fallen Polytechnic University,
Canada.
Canada.
Make sure we all
And my question to you is, why does the Singapore government actually allow services that are ride-sharing services like Uber to exist, knowing that they could potentially negatively impact a flourishing taxi business, whereas in Canada, a lot of provinces have actually illegalized a lot of these services because they know how negatively they could impact the service.
from both.
The academic perspective to it. How do you stop something that consumer wants? Are you protecting the drivers, or are you meeting consumers' demand? If consumer feels that this is the option that benefits their life, and the current taxi incumbent operators cannot quite deliver that gap, there's no way that the Singapore government, even if they want to, can stop this phenomenon from meeting gaps that is there. Then how do you address displeasure or uneasiness among taxi drivers that their livelihood are being affected? So one of the way that we try to do so in Singapore is to say that the licensing requirements for Uber and Grab will increase, and the licensing requirement for taxi driver will decrease, so that you sort of level the playing field. It's not quite level yet, but you sort of at least make the cost advantage of the other party, which in the past has been non-existent. There's no cost to it, they just enter the market. Make it a little bit more rigorous for them to come into the market. So you increase one side and you bring down the other rules. Now, does that totally solve the problem? We were hoping that the shared economy only serve the peak period. That means where earlier you saw the chart by Professor that there's peak period demand that cannot best be solved. So we were hoping that these services come in to resolve the unmet demand during peak period. However, it has taken on a new creature altogether. Now, because the driver leases the car for the whole day, he doesn't just come out during peak period. He also have to make ends meet during non-peak period. So he starts to compete with the taxi driver throughout the day. So in a way, instead of just a peak period demand supplier, he is now coming in to become like a taxi operator, because he has to run 24 hours as well. So it's not sharing a vehicle, because in Singapore the phenomenon is a leasing model. So leasing company are leasing cars to individual and some of the undergraduate students as well. They say that, would you like to lease a car for half the price of a taxi, and I'll lease it to you and you can run a business. So it's not sharing vehicle that I previously owned. Instead, it is leasing company who buying up second-hand cars and allowing it to be rented out as a pseudo taxi operator.
There's more to it too.
20%, which is $4, $5 depending on the amount. 50 cents. So what the business model has evolved is that all the consumer who wants to take a taxi, you book through the taxi apps, and I'll tell you something to the effect that, sorry, no taxi available right now, but would you like a car to bring you to same thing? So they upsell you the car because they collect 20 to 25% for the car, and they collect a flat rate for the taxi.
Actually, just on that, when Hinky explained that to me, I realized that I was being upgraded a lot of times. So I decided to play the algorithm because they probably profiled you, right?
Yep.
So I subsequently, when they asked to upgrade me, right, because all they tell is, no, there are no taxis available, would you like to go for a car? I refuse to take.
Yep.
I just press the big button again and says, okay, let's try again. So I keep trying. And now I find that I'm hardly being upgraded because I'm sending the message that I don't want to be upgraded. So, you know, it's understand the system that we're just maybe trying to give it.
I think this is a very good question because I think every city is kind of different. And for Singapore's case, I think the most obvious answer is that the government agency LTA is not sure initially whether or not this is positive, having a positive impact. So I think after probably a few months, roughly speaking, I think 1 year of observation, I think now the consensus is just like Inky just mentioned. It's actually positive, particularly during the peak hours, where your taxi capacity is just not enough, it's just not there. But one thing definitely they don't want to see is that, as again, Inky mentioned, that during non-peak hours, you don't want those additional cars driving around just increasing those congestions with no reason, right? I mean, you have enough capacity actually during those times. So, which brings about actually another very important issue, which is whether or not balancing supply or demand is a rocket science. So, I mean, from paper, I will have a slightly different opinion. I think actually it's a rocket science. But rocket science for different reasons. It's not pure science. And technology definitely is there. We see that is doable. But what is making it very difficult for traditional taxi companies to do it is all this like company structure and also the trust issue, right? So suppose you have a third party, let's say hypothetically handle all this incoming booking demands for all the companies. How do you make sure that this particular entity is impartial in executing the order? Right? It doesn't have any preference, for example, over selecting this car of this company A, selecting that car of company B, right? I mean, this is like practicality-wise, this is something that's making it very difficult. The second issue over here is that again, I mean, in order to enable, let's say, Uber type of service, taxi fleet, we see that it is definitely possible, right? But again, you have to make sure that taxi companies, they are ready to accept that. Taxi drivers, they are ready to accept that. Accept that in the sense that they need to have the infrastructure where they can feedback your location in real time, in a trusty manner. They don't, for example, alter all the data stream in the back end, try to gain advantage over other drivers, so on and so forth. But I guess probably that's the reason why, besides Singapore, where we have a very kind of a very consolidated taxi market, where you see that taxi company is more competitive, more really much stronger against the competition from Uber or Grab type of service. But in all the other cities, as I understand, it's very fragmented, and fragmented market cannot afford to actually do that.
Actually, in response to the loyalty or preference issue, there's a new apps that are out there, which is brands such as Kahoo, who say that, you know, I will only flash out taxi in the vicinity regardless of brands for the commuters to choose. So there's no artificial bidding for brand A will be allocated first, brand B will be allocated first. They will flash the types of taxi near the vicinity and the price and the type of taxi that is near you. You make the choice. If you prefer this one over the other one, the consumer make the choice. So technology has a way of finding solution that incumbents or others may have. The trust issue can be resolved. The only problem is that for the longest time, there is no consolidated one apps across the whole island that could solve all this problem. You don't really need so many apps provider or so many brands. You actually only need one that matches all the demand and supply. And with the on board of Uber and Grab, hopefully there will be a consolidation of one single apps that will be able to match the demand and supply as far as commuters are concerned.
I'm going to ask one question and then give it back to the crowd to ask that combines Willie's first presentation with what we saw for the second and the third presentation. So if one is going to be an on-demand transport provider in Singapore or other regional cities, well, doing well means having a viable business. Okay? What does doing good mean? If you're an on-demand transport provider, and let's take Singapore, what does doing good mean?
Okay, Steve, when you first invited me to come and talk about doing good and doing well, right? I thought you wanted to talk about social enterprises. And then when I found out a bit more about the case, which you all will get into tomorrow, actually my take is that actually what the likes of Uber, Grab, and companies like this are doing is actually primarily commercial. If you think about it. Their business model. It's about how they can make a good living. That's not to say they're doing anything bad, because all business fundamentally, right, to do well, you need to be producing something of value to your consumers. So, I mean, whether it's Apple, IBM, we produce as commercial companies, but the products they produce, right, I mean, these kind of things, they all are of value to us, which is the reason why we buy them in the first place. So doing good is not just about providing a good or a service which is needed by society or by consumers. So everything that those companies are today are, if you ask me, commercial. If they want to do good, it really is what even large companies are doing, where they go beyond the part of being able to satisfy the customers and make a good return. It's the way in which they go about their business, the way they treat their employees, the way in which they contribute to the community, the kind of things they do beyond what is needed to do to make a good return on their investment. And there are a lot of things which companies can do. So the likes of Apple, for example, right? When they produce this phone and says that I'm going to produce the cheap version for the underdeveloped countries because I want to empower and enhance them, and they don't worry too much about community or that. So the thing which, if you ask me, and Uber and Grab could do good, would be how they reach out to the community, how they care about the taxi drivers that they might actually displace, right? In terms of how it's actually in their business practices and how they treat their staff and how they treat the rest of the community.
The concept seems to come from Jim Collins, do good, do better. And for the traditional taxi companies, the relationship between the taxi driver and the taxi operator is not one of employer-employee. There's no responsibility to provide for insurance as far as medical care or retirement adequacy is concerned. There is none. You are a sole proprietor, you are a self-employed person, you look after yourself. Now, when you hold cash every day, you take cash from the commuters, what are you going to do with the cash? Put aside money for retirement, put aside money for medical care, unlikely to happen. So what we did over the years with the taxi operator, and to be fair to them, is can you help us co-save as far as retirement adequacy and medical coverage is concerned? So we have a compulsory MediSave account in Singapore. And we asked the taxi operator, if the taxi driver is prepared to put aside $1 a day, would you match that dollar? And they did so. So to a certain extent, that is partially do good, ensuring that there's medical coverage as far as serious illnesses are concerned. So now the ball is in the court of Uber and Grab and say that you have a fleet of drivers who are working with you. Will you be prepared to do the same thing, which means that you're going to plow money back into the system to ensure that they are safer with regards to medical emergency? Now the second and very critical thing is they've been touting this concept called user review. Best thing since sliced bread. If the user feels that the driver is no good, then the driver is no good. Once, twice, 3 times you're out. Anything below, out of range of 5, if you hit less than 4 in 3 times, you're out. You no longer is fit to drive and take bookings from me. Now, that user review is not doing good because you don't give the driver the chance of understanding how that review comes about. Is it a fair review from the user? Or was it a user who trying to be difficult and is there a recourse? Is there an appeal process? How do you sort of retrain that guy? What you do? Is there a representative body speaking out on behalf of the driver to the operator and say that this user review, the algorithm is not fair, the standard is set too high, what are the recourse? There's no appeal process. Your grievance cannot be heard. So doing good could amount also to the fact that you look after the interests of the individual who's trying to make a living.
I forgot one point, which is the ultimate good that the company can do is what I think a true definition of social enterprise is. The profits don't go back to the investors. It gets plowed back into the community in some way or other. Right. So if any company claims to be a social enterprise, right, in its ultimate form, it really is that the money doesn't return back to the investors.
So you're saying the real test is if a company's putting forth a story that we're a social enterprise or a socially oriented enterprise, but the profits are not being recirculated in this way,
yeah,
you're saying something's not consistent.
No, I mean, it's just one way in which you can do good. Just that, you know, there are a lot of organizations called themselves social enterprises that doesn't go through this aspect of it. But all the NTUC social enterprises you can see, right, the money ultimately is plowed back, in this case, into the union, into the community. But it's when, so there are two aspects to doing good. Right? One is when you don't drive for maximum profits. You drive to be a good corporate citizen, so you don't try to maximize, you may want to optimize the profit. But the ultimate aspect of it is when the profit won't return back to investors. They actually pour back to the community in some way or other, either by straight giving to charity or a lot of time.
Shifen, you have done some work outside of your taxi work where you've shown that the core technology platform capability for the micro supply and demand matching that one might use for on-demand transportation, matching people with taxis. It can also be used for other things in some other creative ways that could be used for social good that people might not intuitively think about. Without highlighting one particular thing, can you give a range of examples?
Yeah. So one of the things, just as Steve mentioned, we try to do it over here and try to experiment it as a concept, is try to design a framework such that we can engage ordinary people to do something. Right? This something can be wide-ranging, right? It can be just reporting whether or not somebody forget to turn off the light, turn off the aircon, or whether or not there's some faulty equipment out there that need to be fixed, so on and so forth. And again, I mean, you see that actually people want to do good, right? They want to feedback to community, but they need some help. What you have on the cell phone is just basically a platform for you to interact with potential helpers. Your helpers doesn't need to be full-time employee. It can be anybody. It can be a citizen who are willing to spend a few seconds, take a shot, and send a message, right? But you have to make it really easy to do. Right? So what we have this particular platform, basically in the background, if you agree to participate in this particular environment, this is essentially a campus experiment. We invite all our students to sit in. So we will capture their movement pattern. All the patterns are anonymized, but we kind of know how they move around on a typical day. And based on this particular information, we can actually design a particular itinerary. If they express their interest in doing some additional jobs, I mean, every job is a couple seconds for them, we will, based on their itinerary, come up with a sequence of tasks that they may be able to do throughout the day. They can,
For example, is the toilet stall clean? You know, is the sink messy in the toilet? Is the vending machine empty? I mean, just things of everyday life.
Yeah.
But where you need the sensory capabilities of a human to take a look.
yeah, very critical, even whether or not the professor is working diligently in his room. We also have this kind of test. So, but one thing over here is that takeaway from this couple months of experiment is really this. If you are able to provide minimum level of guidance to people, even just like popping up, and instead of people browsing like hundreds of tests in their neighborhood, which most of the company out there are doing that, you actually provide a recommendation, 5 to 10 recommendations. Their only decision is whether or not to accept it. With this very minor change, the chance of people doing tests, the efficiency of people actually doing this kind of test for you is raised quite dramatically, right? You actually increase the ratio of people's participation by over 50%. And when they participate in doing this micro jobs, their efficiency is also increased, right? So you can actually save more than 50% of the time running around, right? Because we plan it out for you. You don't have to think. We tell you what's the best sequence.
So this same technology to help with on-demand transportation, supply and demand matching can be used to do a wider range of things as well.
Yeah. But particularly if you think about volunteer network, for example. Volunteers, they are precious resources. Right? Not a lot of people are willing to help. So if you indeed have volunteers, you have people who are willing to help, you should utilize their time and energy in the best possible way.
Well, as I've been asked by our student organizing committee, let's wrap up, all right? Our panelists are sort of here, they've got things to go do, but you can always, hey, there's one question I want to ask or something as people hang around for a few minutes. Feel free to do that, and then that's it. I want to thank the panelists, everybody, and I'm not just saying this, you were all marvelous. It was really good. We open up our Apex Business IT, and thank you all for coming to Singapore and